peace must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.
It is ridiculous and it is against the laws of nature that we can have somebody sitting pretty who takes home more money than the credible entrepreneur who is doing actual production of goods and services.
We always say it as it is.
It is only in this country that when a thief is arrested, you hear elders from their tribe saying, "He is our son and he is our thief."
If you are deviant
Yes.
and I call you leader, probably you are already a leader, but you are leading in the wrong direction.
We want to see the role of the youth
Yeah.
in the security,
Yes.
governance,
Yes.
and development.
The youth that I meet and work with here, you know, we call them the millennials and X's and Y's, this and that. They don't necessarily want to live like their fathers and grandfathers,
Yes.
do business like their fathers and grandfathers. They're more independent, they're better educated, and they're the ones that are making everything move in this region.
We look at the issues, we talk about issues that impact people's lives in Africa.
The African peoples themselves continue to cheer bad leaders, and because they cheer them on, they continue to be misled.
Let me ask you, doctor, would you rather be somebody who does not enjoy so much freedom but you are rich?
Yes.
Or you'd rather be poor who you are actually imprisoned by the poverty itself?
My goal is not to come here and say, I want the majority ownership, I want to own this, I want to own that, I want to do this. My goal is we all make money and we're all happy, and I help build a big business here.
Punchline is for Africa, with Africa, from Africa.
I want to call upon the people of Abazonia today, wherever you are in the diaspora in Abazonia itself, that in a struggle you are bound to have divisions. But divisions should not divert you from the main focus, the main challenge. We have struggled to expose the happenings, the human rights abuses in Abazonia. The army has killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands, burnt houses of people, internet was cut off, schools were closed, dispensaries, hospitals were burnt down. Abazonians should not be intimidated by Paul Robia. It is not upon the leaders of Abazonia, because I am not from Abazonia, but I've played a pivotal role in making sure that I loud out the voices, I put out the call, I call upon AU, EU, United Nations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. Many of them have listened to some of the things that I say here, and they have come at last. America, United States of America, is slowly moving towards giving the Abazonian people the dignity they deserve. I therefore call upon the leaders and the leadership of the Abazonian people to unite for a purpose. The unity of purpose is paramount, as opposed to disunity, which has nothing but only produces ego that we have seen in South Sudan. What has killed South Sudan is not because they don't have the money, the minerals, the resources. Is ego between Riek Machar and Salva Kiir. We would not like to see that ego come to the people of Abazonia, the leadership of Abazonia. I call upon Samuel Sako, Akanga, Milan, and Eko to unite and talk with one voice on international scene that will bring about the peace, the tranquility that you yearn for since 1961 when the resolution 1608 was abandoned by the United Nations General Assembly and Abazonia was annexed by the Cameroon government by then. I call upon you, my brothers, to pick up the unity call and free your people without disintegration. Thank you.
Good afternoon to you, wherever you're watching us. Thank you very much. I know for some of you it's a good morning. You just woke up. I see George Ngang, and I know you're watching us all the way from the United States. It could be early morning there. Thank you so much for joining, and the rest of you, wherever you're watching us from across the world. Indeed, it is the People's Court, and this afternoon from here in Nairobi, I'll be by myself. Just a few minutes. Dr. Matanga had something to take care of, and I know we'll have another edition of Good Morning Africa tomorrow, so he'll be joining me then. But for now, you're stuck with me, and for a good reason. Let's talk about what has been making headlines across the world since the death of former President of Egypt, Mr. Morsi, who died, of course, on Monday. And of course, the United Nations has now called for an independent investigation into the sudden death of the former Egyptian president. And remember, on Tuesday, after he died on Monday, of course, he died in court. And there are reports that indicate that even after he showed signs of he was about to collapse, the people around him, I think the police that were there to guard him, did not do anything 10 minutes after he collapsed, and then they just left him there. But those are just allegations, so we really don't know what happened in that court. But of course, Mr. Morsi, Mohamed Morsi, the former Egyptian president, the first democratically elected president in Egypt, died on Monday during a court proceeding. Just after 5 minutes into the procession of the process, he died. He collapsed. He fainted, collapsed, and then he later on passed on. And of course, on Tuesday, well, this news made headlines across the world, and you could see it even in international media stations. It really captured majority of their, airing after the breaking news. But it is very keen to note that on Tuesday, in Egypt, no major newspaper really made this a headline, and you would think this was their former president. This was supposed to make a headline. So on Tuesday, there was almost no front page coverage of Morsi's death in Egypt, and major newspapers instead, the news was reported briefly in the inside pages, which usually devoted to monitoring criminal cases. And you would wonder, why would this be? This is because, Mr. Mohamed Morsi was associated with the Muslim Brotherhood that is considered a very extremist political outfit that, of course, was started in Egypt, and so it's sort of spread across some other countries, Arabic countries across the world, but it has its roots in Egypt, and so he was affiliated to this Muslim Brotherhood. So that could be the reason why his death actually was carried out during on the Egyptian newspapers on the criminal cases section. That is where they would carry the criminal sections. And something very interesting, while they were reporting this, the reports never mentioned Morsi's status either as a former head of state or overthrown president, and so there was no official statement. So far, there's not been any official statement from the country's president, Mr. Al-Sisi, and so people are wondering. And of course, the UN came out yesterday and said there should be an independent investigations into the death of the former president. And of course, Egypt has, through one of the ministries, has come out to say that it has lashed out at the United Nations for politicizing the death of the country's first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi. So in case you're wondering, why is it this outfit that was associated with Mr. Mohamed Morsi? Why is it that the president now, the current president now, Al-Sisi, and other leaders across the Arab world are really not so much in support of this outfit called Muslim Brotherhood, although it has gained sort of some level of support in other Arabic countries countries, but is not very welcome with all of them. And of course, yesterday we saw in major countries, Arabic countries in the world, a place like even Turkey, they held a mass, in remembrance of the former president. And of course, the Prime Minister Erdogan was present in one of those prayers for Mr. Morsi in Istanbul, in Turkey. And so it's a lot going. So the Muslim Brotherhood, this is an Islamic organization that was founded in Islamia, Egypt, by Hassan al-Banna in March of 1928 as an Islamic religious, political, and social movement. Now the group spread to other countries, but has its largest, or one of its largest organizations in Egypt, and has been there for years. And it has been the largest, best organized, and most disciplined political outfit. And despite a succession of government crackdowns between 1948 and also in 1965, after the plots and alleged plots of assassination to overthrow the government, this Muslim Brotherhood has stood the test of time. And following the 2011, remember the Arab Spring Revolution that happened, and the group was legalized on April that year, and it launched a civic political party. So it sort of had a new political outfit and called itself Freedom and Justice Party. So the Muslim Brotherhood Party, after the Arab Spring of 2011, changed its name to Freedom and Justice Party to contest the elections, because under such an outfit, the Muslim Brotherhood outfit, they were not allowed to contest for any elections in that country. So they were forced to change their names to Freedom and Justice Party to contest the elections, including the 2012 presidential election, when its candidate, Mr. Mohamed Morsi, the late, became Egypt's first democratically elected president. So that is just a short, brief history about this Muslim Brotherhood that has got Mr. Morsi in trouble. So, of course, after Mr. Morsi was elected in 2012, he had one tumultuous year in reign in Egypt, and his presidency, Mr. Morsi had been in custody since his removal of office in 2013 through a military coup. And during this time that he has been in jail, since 2013, he was removed in power. He only served for 1 year. During his time when he was incarcerated, in the 6 years, it is said that the family only got to visit him 3 times, and he also had some health problems with diabetes and other illnesses that really caused him a lot of problems. So the United Nations came out yesterday when they were calling for independent, investigations, and of course the Muslim Brotherhood members also now came out to say, this is an assassination by the president, by the Egyptian government. And also we saw Amnesty International were the first, I think, international outfit to come out and condemn and really the death of a former president of Egypt, Mohamed Morsi, saying that his conditions when he was being held in custody were not very humane. It is said that he was being mistreated and things like that. And so now the UN yesterday came out and said, perhaps there should be a private, an independent investigations into the sudden death of the former Egyptian president. And of course, the coup that happened in 2013 was led by none other than the military commander at that time, who is right now the president of Egypt, and he's the one who, removed Morsi from power. So I don't know, he was still holding some things against Morsi. From what you see, his treatment while Morsi was incarcerated, I don't know, he was still threatened because Muslim Brotherhood outfit is very, very strong in Egypt. Remember, I tried to spread into other Arabic-speaking countries or other Muslim countries, but it has remained very strong in Egypt. And even after changing its name, to Freedom and Justice Party, still the Muslim Brotherhood tag was still very present. And I think they reverted back to using it after, the president was incarcerated. So, of course, Mohamed Morsi was the Egypt's first democratically elected president. I just want us to have just a little history on Egyptians' leadership, and that's why before we come to really the role of where Egypt is today, and it's a position because remember the president of Egypt is right now the chairperson of African Union, and also later on we'll see his hand and interest in even the crisis that is going on in Libya. I know it is something that we talked about here before. We keep talking about it, and also it's his hand in what is happening right now in Sudan, together with two other Arabic countries, that is the United Arab Emirates and also Saudi Arabia, which have been mentioned extensively in the chaos that is going on in Sudan right now, and also in Libya. And so we will just look at that. But just first out, I just wanted us to understand the background of some of these things and why this outfit, Muslim Brotherhood, has not been a very welcome outfit, especially in the leadership under President al-Sisi, who is now the current president, of course, of Egypt. But also he is the one that ousted Mr. Mohamed Morsi from power when he was heading the army in Egypt in 2013. Of course, he had to step down and resign from the military before he could contest the elections, because, you know, according to the AU, you cannot be a member in the African Union if, you know, you're headed by military. So he had to step down, but still he had an army background, and of course he was the head of military, and he led the coup that ousted the former president in Egypt, now the late Mohamed Morsi. And while he was being buried, I think he had made a few wishes. He wanted to be buried in his hometown. The government refused that, and they made sure that he was buried in the middle of the night, and only the family members were allowed. So it was a top-guarded, government, I think, funeral, and it was everybody was condoned of, including the press. Just a very few glimpses of photos you can see from that, but it was really covered, and they did not allow any public participation at his funeral. But yesterday we saw other members of Muslim Brotherhood members in solidarity, I think, with the family, and other Muslim Brotherhood members in Egypt across the Arab world come out and say prayers for the late presidents. I don't know what that means in terms of even igniting other possible uprising across Africa, and what probably other extremists from this group might want to do to retaliate over the death of Morsi, because it is believed that they've come out to say this is not a natural death, but the government is insisting this is a natural death. He suffered a heart attack and died while in court, but they've come out to say, the Muslim Brotherhood has come out to say, you know what? It is the mistreatment he received while he was in prison. He lacked proper medical care. He lacked proper care while he was in prison, and so that is what led to his death. So it is a story that is still, is still developing, and let's see if the independent, investigations that the UN has called for will actually take place. But since, Egypt has come out and told the UN to back off and let Egypt have its own, internal affairs with peace. And as I mentioned earlier before that the death of former President Mohamed Morsi did not even feature not even feature on the front pages of major newspapers or news outlets in Egypt. And even if when they mentioned him, they did not refer to him as a former president. He was not given that respect or that reference. And so that is very curious. And in case you're wondering why, that is why I just brought a little history about the Muslim Brotherhood, because he was attached to the Muslim Brotherhood as an outfit that is considered to be, not very. Mr. al-Sisi is not very comfortable with that, and it is an Islamist, religious, and political and social movement group here. And in Egypt, it changed its name during the elections in 2012 and called itself Freedom and Justice Party. Now, where Egypt sits right now as the chair of the AU is very important for the African continent. That is something that I cannot underscore enough. And when you look at the crisis that is happening in Libya right now, Egypt has been mentioned extensively on its hand in, fueling and even, equipping the renegade Haftar. And it's been very clear. And so you wonder when Egyptian's president was calling on, he had an emergency meeting in April with some other AU leadership to try to solve the crisis in Libya. It was very hypocritical, knowing that he is part of the reasons and the causes and the what is happening right now in Libya. So for him calling for a meeting, purporting to try to find solution in what is happening in Libya, a lot of people thought, how can he even be as part of a solution while he is part of a problem? That is oxymoronic, cannot happen, is not possible. And so Egypt, especially the president right now, al-Sisi, has very keen interest in Egypt because Khalifa Haftar, the Libyan warlord bombarding Tripoli in an attempt to oust the country's UN-recognized government, has won unequivocal support from the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and they're very, very close political allies. So with Morsi's, with Fattah al-Sisi's position as the African Union chair, it puts all the peace process or all the possible solutions to the crisis right now in Libya at jeopardy, because he cannot purport to try to find a solution while he seems to be part of the problem, a part of the crisis. And Haftar has defied international calls to hold his battle against fighters loyal to the Government of National Accord, that is the GNA. Based in Tripoli, the capital, and the warlord supports a parallel administration based in Libya, and Egypt has provided funding and, of course, arms to Haftar's Libyan National Army, seeing him as a bulwark against Islamist militants. So this just boils down to the Muslim Brotherhood. So apparently Haftar is trying al-Sisi is trying to help Haftar fight against Islamist militants. I remember the outfit of Muslim Brotherhood is considered, of course, it's an Islamist religious, political, social organization group, and they have sometimes extremists in there. So it's I think from this background, I think that's what gives Egypt sleepless nights, and that is the excuse they're using, to help Khalifa Haftar in fighting the UN-recognized leadership in Egypt, the GNA, the Government of National Accord in Tripoli. Remember, Haftar was based in the east side of the capital of Libya, but now he's made strides, and recently he has been bombarding the capital, Libya. So, and remember when Italy came out and really castigated France on its role in what is happening right now in Libya, and he said that Italy came to castigate France, on its role in Libya. And remember, the two vice prime ministers came out and said, France really never left its former territories, colonial territories, and so. Because Italy also has, Italy are their former colonial powers of Libya. So Italy, the former colonial power in Libya, of course, it has extensive oil investments in that country, and they were trying to protect the Tripoli-based government because they have extensive investments in that country, and so they were supporting the GNA, the Government of National Accord, that is UN-backed, and France, of course, together with Egypt, said to have been supporting the renegade Haftar. So Italy was very frustrated. Of course, it was protecting its own interest in Libya, being that it has invested heavily and it is benefiting from the wealth in Libya. And so there was a clash. I think it was out of their own interest, but also Italy raised a very pertinent questions when it said that this outfit, France, does not mean well for some of these African countries that it is involved in and its former colonies. And they said France should learn that when you're done with your former colony, you just leave and let them have their other affairs in order. And so they had a back and forth between those two European countries. And it is very interesting to note that there's a time, earlier in April, France blocked a draft by the EU resolution that would have condemned Mr. Haftar and called for him to retreat. So Italy had brought a resolution to the United Nations, to the EU Assembly, and wanted for Haftar to be blocked and to call for a ceasefire. But France blocked that resolution that would have condemned Haftar and that would have made him to retreat. So these two European countries have been having a diplomatic row over there, and now their problems are spilling over to Africa. Very apparent. So, of course, on October 23rd last year, Egypt mediated talks between the Libyan National Army, the military faction led by Khalifa Haftar, and which controlled most parts of the eastern Libya, and the international recognized government of national accord. So, having all this information in the background, and now you see Libya coming in and trying to mediate between the Libyan National Army that is led by Khalifa Haftar together with the government of national accord, you wonder, is even Egypt very honest in these talks? Are they the right person who should have even carried out the mediation process? Because obviously, these negotiations stalled for 6 months, remember, and had resumed only a week earlier, reflecting Egypt's desire to stabilize its western region. But the desires to stabilize the region and its neighbors there, it does not come from a place of honesty, I think, from Egyptian part, because they already have an interest and a bias even when they're approaching such negotiations. So, of course, on one hand, now Mr. Al-Sisi is tied because being the AU chair, he has the mandate, he has the responsibility to look at such matters and the crisis that is happening right now in Libya. So he had to call for that emergency meeting earlier in April. But also, on the other hand, he's the one supporting the renegade. He's the one who's supplying. There's been allegation that Egypt, together with other countries, they're supplying arms to General Khalifa Haftar. And then, on the other hand, Egypt is still trying to sit down and negotiate and try to mediate between these two warring factions. That is the unfortunate place that we find ourselves in Africa right now under the leadership of Egyptian President, Al-Sisi, being the AU chair. Let me just read some of your comments. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. As I said earlier, Dr. Matsanga had some business to take care of, but we'll be here. I'll be here back with him tomorrow for Good Morning Africa. But I just needed to talk about this. Remember, we were supposed to talk about it earlier, but also we had some things to do, so we suspended the topic yesterday too. So right now, today, I thought, you know what? Maybe I'll just take a look at it, and we have a conversation together. And thank you so much for your participation. Let me just read some of your comments. I'll start with King Samuel asking, who did Egypt butcher? Now, from the explanation I just gave, I hope you were following the events that are happening right now in Libya and the hand that Egypt has in the crisis that is happening right now in Libya. I think you can decide that for yourself. But also, what is happening right now in Egypt? Since he came into power in 2013 after the ousting of the former President Mohamed Morsi, Al-Sisi there has been an increased, decreasing space even for media freedom. We've seen journalists, even from Al Jazeera, being incarcerated for no reason at all. Even from other, media organizations, we've seen some political prisoners being detained without even trial, without even no reason at all. So the leadership of Al-Sisi is very intolerant, and they're very punitive, and that has been a problem in Egypt. And any dissenting voice is met with a lot of aggression, and that's why King Samuel George Nganga, thank you for watching. Overmass Chineduba, you're saying, God save your people. And Malusa Jubilan, you're saying, you're right. I think that's the earlier clip that was playing from Mr. Matanga. And Going Solo, you're saying, back from Amberland, and you're watching. Thank you so much. And also you're saying Morsi's death is a sign of a seed sown by the present president of Egypt. He will reap exactly what he sows on Morsi. You're saying R.I.P. Morsi, yes. And I believe Morsi did quite not very good things. And I think he also, after he came to power, remember he was the first democratically elected president in Egypt, but after he came to power, you know, there are things that he did that were not right, and under him, he wanted to change a few things, and I think we'll just look at that as we continue with this conversation. And demonstrators were met with live bullets, and so these are some of the charges that got him to where he was, being incarcerated. And I don't know what Mr. Al-Sisi is doing now that is very different, but if I was him, or if history would serve him right, then he will see what happened to Morsi, the person he toppled, and also what happened before that, and other African leadership who has that mentality when it comes to the Iron Fist leadership in Africa, and most recently what happened to Omar al-Bashir. He will take lessons from history, but unfortunately, Africans are not very good when it comes to learning from our history. And so we find ourselves in these predicaments every so often, especially in our leaderships. And so Going Solo, you're saying Morsi's death. Okay, I've read that. And Muhindo Brian is saying African Union is a group of tea drinkers. They don't care about people in Africa. We are suffering when they're in good hotels and driving good cars. And I think your sentiments are shared with a lot of Africans. They are disappointed by this outfit called African Union. Remember when it used to be Organization of African Unity, its mandate was very limited. So they thought by relaunching it and giving it and rebranding it, calling it the African Union, perhaps the world expand its mandate, and we see it just sitting, on the fence when it should just get into these countries. Like, look at what happened in Sudan, which I'll be talking about just very shortly. And the ties between Sudan and, of course, the hand in Egyptian leadership in Sudan and where it is today, and see how. But anyway, Al-Sisi is the chairperson of AU, so it's very complicated now. But yeah, that is AU for you. And Bang Gajagi, you're saying, see what Arabs doing to themselves. That's what the South Sudanese politicians do, was killing to themselves. Egypt and Sudan are same political system. And Gajagi, I don't know if I said your name right. I was just reading an article, was it 2 days ago, and they said that the number of South Sudanese who have died in Sudan during that time, during the sit-ins, it's about 200 South Sudanese who have died. So I don't know correct number of people who have died in Sudan during the revolution time has not been well accounted for. But I read a report somewhere that about 200 South Sudanese have lost their lives in Egypt since the beginning, since I think January. And Nick Chukwueza, you're saying African Union is a mess. And Pascal Kiki, you're saying, do we really own and control AU? Pascal Kiki, this is a very important question you're asking. And we've been asking here, in case you've been watching us, we wonder, AU, whose interest are they really representing? Because a lot of times they act as gatekeepers, like they're acting on behalf of, they're protecting something on behalf of. They're not acting, these leaders we put out there, they're not acting on behalf of the African continent. And so you wonder, and it is something we've been asking here, who is controlling the AU? Of course, they are the master puppeteers and the people pulling the strings behind the scenes. And of course, when it comes to some matters and issues that want addressed in Africa, but also our leaders allow them to have a say. But also that goes to the question of sovereignty and how independent we are as Africans and the different African countries we have in the continent. Are we truly very much independent when sometimes we can't even fund our own elections? So when you allow somebody to come and fund your election, when you allow somebody to come and fund your health system, to come and fund your education system, to come and fund very important aspects of your lives in a country, so basically you're giving this person a voice. And I think that is the caviar that comes with these funds that we receive here in Africa once we allow it to come in, because We need it. Why? Because actually Africa is one of the continents in the world that is endowed with natural resources. We're rich, but we have a leadership that does not mean well for the people. And you can look at that by the leadership we have at the AU. So if this leadership, a lot of it in Africa, do not mean well for the people, that means they cannot do that which will enrich the citizens of these different countries. And now we have poor management, we have corruption, we have money laundering, we have misuse of public resources. We end up broke. And so we go borrow funds, and when we go borrow funds, they come with some, preconditions, and one of them is you must allow us to have a say in your country's, political or social or whatever it is, the dynamics. We have to come there and give our thoughts, and we have to tell you what to do because anyway, I'm funding you. So that is the predicament African continent finds itself in. And so that brings down to the question, really, are we really independent? When we walk around the world, and we are proud to celebrate 60 years of independence. Remember, this year, the first African country, that is Ghana, celebrated 60 years of independence, and a lot of other countries are celebrating so many years of independence. But are we truly, truly, truly independent? That is the big question. So Pascal, Kiki, I understand where you're coming from. And Gajie, you're saying African Union is a nonsense organization. African Union needs to be reformed and give another name. They were already reformed. Remember, there used to be Organization of African Unity until 2002, when the outfit was given a different name. And the reason was why the Organization of African Unity had a very limited mandate. So there are things, remember the civil wars that happened especially in the 90s and the 80s in so many African countries, and the OAU was very limited in terms of reaching out under humanitarian grounds. But in the AU new charter, the security section especially allows the African Union not to sit in the fence, but intervene in a member state under humanitarian grounds. But when you look at the recent events happening in Sudan, you look at the events happening in Ambazonia in Cameroon, you look at the events happening in Biafra in Nigeria, you look at the events happening in the Central African Republic right now, and you look at even the recent, is it yesterday or today in the morning, I was reading about the death of so many people in the DRC, the militia coming back and they're regrouping, and people are now, Uganda so far, since I think over the weekend, has received another 3,000 refugees. Where is the African Union? Why hasn't African Union already made a statement so far? They have not said anything. So you wonder really, and I ask here, the same way you're asking our viewer, that what is the mandate of the African Union? Because they are allowed now to intervene in a country under humanitarian crisis. And we see all these humanitarian crises happening across so many countries across Africa, and the AU chooses to remain mum, or they come in very lately because for whatever reason that is best known to them. And of course, Pascal, you're also adding that most African leaders are doing the bidding for neo-colonialists. You know what? You couldn't be farther from the truth, you know. And Chiboy, or Jim Keonya, you're saying God bless Biafra. All right. And all right, Bidal Lo Lasuba, you're saying AU is a toothless organization held hostage by foreign powers like China, EU, and the United States of America. Yes, and not only AU, but also the UN. There, I was reading another article. Remember, right now, the atrocities that are happening right now in Yemen, Syria, and the bombardment by by the US and its allies in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and a country like, of course, Saudi Arabia especially, and the bombarding, the way it's been killing so many people and children are suffering in Yemen. So AU normally, not AU, but the UN has like a list of shame for countries that have perpetuated, the death or crimes towards children and women and men of a certain country. And from what we've been seeing from the news, Saudi Arabia was supposed to get the first spot in this list of shame. But guess what? They did not get it. You know why? Because they are the biggest funders of the United Nations and the AU as well. You know, we receive extra external funding from outside. So our masters, essentially. So that explains to you why we find ourselves in the position we are today. So Bidal Law Lasuba, you can now understand why AU is a toothless, organization, and saying that it's being held hostage by foreign powers, pretty much because, you know what? Their funding. So I think the leaders are just dancing to their own tunes, and here we are as Africans, and we don't know what to do. I think we're just left under our own mercies. I don't know. Israel Williams, you're saying good afternoon, brothers and sisters home and abroad. Support Biafra. All right. Biggie, you're saying AU is non-existing. All right. And Bang Short, you're saying African Union should be removed, resolved, and form new organization called Africa Security Council. But they do have a special security council within the African Union that was mandated, to intervene during the crisis in the member states or under humanitarian crisis, and other mandates that were extended and expanded and allowed and given to the AU. So even if it is changed, but the ideology, the people, the process is still the same, I don't know how much we'll be able to achieve so far. I don't know, Gajagi, your name is a bit tricky for me to say. Please let me know if I'm saying it right. I don't know, what would you suggest will be the mandate of this new African Security Council, if you may? And Chimazuru Silas is saying, Miriam, we Biafrans love you. God bless you. Thank you so much. And we love you too. And we're praying for you guys. I don't know what is the latest from Biafra. I hope there are no deaths. But it's just yesterday here, there was one of, I think, human rights activist. I think he was in Germany, and he was being asked about the state and the situation right now in Biafra land, and his response, I think I read it here yesterday. I can't remember the exact words, but please let me know the latest from Biafra land, and I'll be happy to share with our viewers across the world. Romanus Obi Chuku Kamadu Uguru. Your name is so long. You're saying without Biafra, no peace in Africa. Thank you so much. Going solo, you're saying AU is just a union of tyrants who come together to congratulate themselves after borrowing money from China. So you think now China is like the big brother? I don't know the position of China in relations to the AU and the African state. They seem to have sort of captured us or what? With their wonderful loans and their wonderful everything and the infrastructure. But we go there to borrow. So we really can't. We've allowed ourselves, we've opened ourselves, we've made ourselves vulnerable to even China right now. So you're saying they meet, they have tea, and then they plot on how they're going to borrow and then come back and squander that money through corruption. Yeah? All right. About Marol, you're saying thank you for what you brought up. Okay, so continue writing to me. And please, while you write, let me know where you're watching us from this afternoon. In case you're missing Dr. Batanga, he had some things to take care of. But tomorrow, I promise, we'll be back here bright and early for another edition of Good Morning Africa. And we were looking at the position of, African Union and the politics of Egypt, and has AU been captured by external forces? What is really happening in the African Union with the leadership of Al-Sisi being at the helm of the African Union? And we see Al-Sisi's contribution to the crisis in Libya. I was just talking about it a while ago. And now we see, because let's just go straight to Sudan and what is happening right now in Sudan. Remember, the army leader about 4 weeks ago, is it 4 or 3 weeks ago? Over the weekend, it will be 4 weeks ago. Visited, about 3 weeks ago, visited Egypt, and then he went to, the second in command, Mr. Hemedi. The one with the Sudanese Rapid Force, the one who has the Sudanese Rapid Force. Yes, in other words, the Janjaweed, I call it the militia group because that is who they are. Army cannot kill people like that. Army cannot maim people like that. Army are meant to protect lives and to make sure everybody is safe, like they were doing at the beginning of the protest outside the army, headquarters in Khartoum. But after his visit in Egypt, and then he went to visit United Arab Emirates, and then he went to visit Saudi Arabia. immediately he came back over that weekend. That is when the following Monday, the protesters were met with a lot of force. And of course, now about over 100 people died. And it's just yesterday. And now the organizers of the protest came out and said, you know what, since we are being targeted and Janjaweed is all over Khartoum, now we're going to hold this protest at night in our homes. Remember, last week they had called for a civil disobedience, but after very important services was told in Khartoum, the army had to, they sort of, through the mediation of Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, they were able to sort of resolve into the protesters ending their civil disobedience and their army extending a hand and also agreeing to come together with opposition and trying to find solutions for that. But also, one of the protesters' sides, when they were demanding that some of the opposition figures to be released. Remember, the army had arrested key opposition leaders in Khartoum, and they had been jailed, and so they were released, but instead of being released, they were actually taken to South Sudan. I do not even understand how that works. They were deported to South Sudan, some of the opposition leaders from Khartoum. So it is after the military's leadership in Khartoum visiting Egypt especially. I don't know they visited Egypt in Al-Sisi's capacity as the AU chairperson, or I don't know they visited Egypt in the interest that Egypt has in Khartoum. And also after that, they visited Saudi Arabia and they also visited UAE. Remember, you can understand why they were visiting here, because former President Omar al-Bashir and of course now the military leadership, and one of the things that they have not been agreeing with the protest side is the constitution right now in Sudan is suspended, so they wanted the new constitution based on Sharia laws, and the protesters were not having it at all, and so the reason why they went to Saudi Arabia, which we know is an Islamist state. It operates on Sharia law, and also UAE, it's a little liberal, but not so much, but it's a bit liberal compared to, Saudi Arabia. Could be maybe to influence in terms of having this new constitution under that. So the protesters were not happy with the military meeting, especially with the president of Egypt, and they categorically said, no, whatever you've gone to do in Egypt, do not bring it back here, because we are not interested in Egypt meddling in our internal affairs, in our political dynamics, because they've seen the hand of Egypt and what the leadership of Egypt, especially under Al-Sisi, has done in the country of Libya. And Pascal, you're saying we're not independent. Oting Chekin, you're saying the latter invented and captured by external forces. You're saying the AU was invented and captured. Oh, I've never looked at it like that. So you mean to say we're here crying and hoping that AU will soon see that we require some change and will soon want to actually work on behalf of us Africans who are hoping that they're actually representing us. They are the leadership that we have. But now you're saying this was invented and captured by the external forces. Oh, wow. Okay, keep writing. And Romanus, you're saying African leaders are a disgrace to the humanity. Nelly Jackson, you're saying all hail Biafra. Pascal, you're saying the fact the AU and start all over again. They started, okay, they did not start all over again, but they rebranded it in 2002 from the Organization of African Unity to African Union. So if they were to change it, for example, what would you like for it to look like? What would you like the outfit, to address? What is the name that probably would give this new outfit? And what mandate should they have that you feel then they don't have? They do have the mandate, but how would you want them to represent you, as an African? Please let me know. And AU is laughable. They allow the selling of Africans in Libya. Yes, that story of still slave trade in Libya really breaks my heart. And a lot of these young men from West Africa and a lot of them from Eritrea. We are talking about Eritrea here yesterday and the other day. Remember, there's been some disquiet in Eritrea, and the president Afwerki there. There's nothing like freedom. There's nothing like democracy. The internet is so slow. Don't even bother. And if you're a young person and you want to leave Eritrea, Eritrea, you have to give very good reasons why you're flying out of Eritrea. Only older people are allowed to leave Eritrea, especially older ladies, I hear. I was reading a report. They're very shocking, and human rights abuse there is on the rise. So there's a lot of young people who escape from such a country are trying to head to better places in dying Mediterranean. If not, others are being sold from Libya. That is really heartbreaking. Every time I look at that story, I just can't. It's very inhumane. And Sheikh Utako, you're saying, do you know how many people die in Egypt every day? You can't believe it. Simple making business in human body are target refugees. Yes, Sheikh. Is it Sheikh Utako? And I was just reading here the news the other day, and South Sudanese, especially refugees, are an easy target for this black market organ sales. It's ridiculous and worrying at the same time. And Achuoth, and then you're saying, wow, I like the way United Way developing. United what? And Victor Vilanculo Sandro, you're saying every African must support freedom of Biafra. All right, Pascal, thank you. Outing checking, you're saying you can't be talking about Security Council without fundamental political surgery and justice. Exactly. And you think there are no like safeguards in place when it comes to justice and that could address in the Security Council, in the African Union Security Council, as well as the United Nations Security Council? Is this what is lacking? And in African Union, do they just choose to ignore some of these things, like what you're talking about, outing checking? Your name is very interesting. It's like the same thing, outing checking. I don't understand, but it's lovely. Thank you so much for writing this afternoon. Achuoth, you're saying, what is the function of African Union? And that is what you've been trying to find out. And one of our viewers there had a very interesting, mention of African Union, and they thinks that African Union is just an outfit of, people who just meet to have tea and later on plan on how they're going to get, some funding from China. Because, the Western world, before you're given money there, they have to look at your democratic space in a country. They have to look at your record on human rights. They have to look at governance and things that are important to them before they give you the funds. So that is too much to ask for any African country, because we feel short in a lot of these things. And that is why China, you know how that country is, was welcomed us with open arms. And I was just reading another disturbing report from China just this morning that in the prison, they even kill prisoners in China to harvest the body organs that one of our viewers here is talking about. Now they kill their own in prison. So China's track record when it comes to human rights abuse is just despicable. And Baldrick, you're saying not wrong enough. China is not a big brother. Rather than it's aiming to apply economical imperialism in African continent, our leaders are very much sleeping while it's all over Africa. And Pascal Kiki, you're saying AU is a toothless dog, bigger powers are controlling it, and they are our sponsors. Very unfortunate. Shilon Elijah, you're saying, when will we as a people open our eyes and see what the West is dividing, that the West is dividing our people? And also, who is this person? Muhonyo Jr. saying, AU is useless, only Professor P.L. Lumumba and Julius Malema can save it. Julius Malema. You think Julius Malema and a lot of like-minded people like Julius Malema could be the solution, and maybe it will help in the overhaul of AU, and perhaps we can pave way to proper leadership and people like Julius Malema. Okay, PLO Lumumba. All right. Thank you, Muhonyo Jr. Your sentiments. Thank you so much for writing. And Romanos, you're saying AU, they are favoring Islamic states. That's the truth of the matter. And all right, keep writing. Zakaria Mangok, you're saying Egyptian are subjecting black South Sudanese in Egypt. This case to address by my sister. There's human violation in Arabic world. Yes, I was just reading that news here, and I just said it, I think, a minute ago here. There were a case that South Sudanese refugees in Cairo, Egypt, and other parts of Egypt are being targeted for their organs to be removed and be sold in the black market. And that is very worrying and very... it just gives me chills, because these are people who are running away from persecution from their country, and they go seeking for safe haven, and those are the reports you receive from there. It's very sad and worrying indeed. And I think that now I just want to thank you so much for your company. Remember, we are looking at is the AU at a boiling point? Has it been captured by external forces? And I was just trying to look at the AU leadership right now, which is the chair right now is Mr. Al-Sisi, the president of Egypt. And I just tried to go through the history of Egypt and even the leadership of Egypt right now. Egypt is one of the countries that is leading when it comes to human rights violations. And even the media, freedom, the space is continually shrinking under the leadership of Al-Sisi in that country. And so you wonder, if that is what we have as a chair in the African Union, how do we expect for things to change? Can somebody hold him accountable, even for the death of Morsi? Because the UN has come out very strongly yesterday and said, you know what, there needs to be an independent investigation over the death of the former Egypt president, Mohamed Morsi, who died on Monday. And it is believed that it is under the conditions that he was being subjected to, even in jail, that really must have contributed to his early death. That happened, that was very unfortunate on Monday. And even after he died, the manner in which the government of Egypt proceeded and handled his death, and even the burial was really questionable. Remember, they did not want any. Mr. Morsi, before his death, through his lawyer, had wanted for him to be buried, if at all he dies, he wanted to be buried in his own hometown. The government of Egypt refused. They made sure he was buried at night with only family members, and when he was in prison for the last 6 years, the family was only allowed a visit 3 times. And as much as he might not be an example of anything moral and upright and good leadership, but still, as a human being, I think he deserved to be treated. I mean, the guy was already in jail. Give him his diabetes medication if that's what he wanted, because you're suffering from diabetes. And it is believed that he was denied even medical treatment while he was in jail, and he was treated very, very badly. So now, under the leadership, and of course, he was toppled by now the Egyptian president Al-Sisi, who was the head of the military in 2013. But after toppling Mohamed Morsi, he had to resign as a military person, and he was elected the president of Egypt. I remember right now he has extended his mandate. They only voted the other day to mutilate the referendum, I think a month ago, to mutilate a referendum that will allow him the mandate to rule until 2030 what? Can you believe that? So a person with this kind of leadership mentality, this totalitarian leadership mentality, this is what we have as the leadership of AU right now. And then you throw in Mr. Mohamed Faki, the other person from Chad, and now you wonder why we are where we are today. If he cannot even observe simple matters of human rights in his country, if he is so intolerant that he jails anything that speaks against his brutal leadership, how do you expect Mr. Al-Sisi to solve the crisis in Libya that he is contributing arms towards the renegade Haftar? How do you expect the chairman of AU to find solutions in Sudan while he is part of some of the problems that are plaguing Sudan right now? He has an underhand and an interest in the things that are happening in Sudan, and not in a good way. How do you expect the chairman of AU, Mr. Al-Sisi, to talk about the human rights abuse happening in the southern part of Cameroon, for example? It's asking for too much, because he has proved he's already showing the world who he is. But we should be comfortable. Are we supposed to be comfortable as Africans to just be okay and accept, you know what, this is what we have for the leadership of AU, and be okay with that? I think not. And I'm just wondering, because I've been trying to go through Twitter and other social media sites and just see which African leader will even dare to even castigate Morsi. I mean, Al-Sisi, about the death of Morsi, even mention it, even send condolences. I did not see any one of them that is president right now. They've all observed a silence of conspiracy. all the leadership of Africa. Nobody has come out. And remember, the manner in which Morsi, he did not even get a front page coverage in any major leading and media outlet in Egypt yesterday. They did not even refer to him as the former president. And that is the leadership of Al-Sisi. And that is the person we have as an AU chairperson. I'm worried as an African. I'm truly worried. So Bismarck Bora, you're saying Malema is a true son of Africa, and so is PLO Lumumba. All right, thank you so much. I agree with that. Is the firebrand opposition leader from South Africa. Ashilo Elijah is saying the black organs are the best and the strongest. Please don't say that. You'll encourage these people to go hunting for everybody black, anything black they see, to harvest some of this important and vital. It will mean they'll kill people out there. We don't want them to do that. And Peter Lam Lol is saying AU is just an organization, and without principles, a toothless organization, an ethical organization that lack power to change Africa in general, like EU. All right, so African continent need leadership change from each state, countries to AU, and get rid of these hyenas who making feel shameful always in this 21st century. All right, so those are your comments. I think my time is up. So I really want to thank you so much, our viewers from wherever you're watching us from. You did not tell me where you're watching us from. Normally, it's just nice to know where you're watching us from across the world. But still, I appreciate your time. And as I said earlier, Dr. Matsanga had some very urgent businesses to take care of, but we'll be back here tomorrow for another edition of Good Morning Africa. But for right now, thank you so much, and hopefully we can meet here tomorrow for another edition of Good Morning Africa. From me, Miriam Ogoto, it is bye-bye for now.
Peace must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.